The biting winter wind rattled the windows of Willow Creek Saloon as Tabitha Morgan pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and the tiny bundle clutched against her chest. Her 6-month-old daughter Emma whimpered softly. Her small face reddened from the cold and hunger that had plagued them both for days. Tabitha's trembling legs barely carried her through the swinging doors of the establishment, the only place still lit in this God-forsaken town after nightfall. The year was 1875, and the Dakota Territory winters showed no mercy to anyone, especially not to a widowed woman with an infant and nowhere to go. The stagecoach that had dropped her in this remote outpost had departed hours ago, taking with it any hope of moving on until the next one arrived in 3 days' time. The boarding house had no vacancies, and the innkeeper had made it clear that a woman traveling alone with a baby was not the sort of guest he welcomed. The saloon fell silent as she entered, a dozen pairs of eyes turning to assess the bedraggled newcomer. Tabitha swallowed hard, clutching Emma closer as the smell of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies assaulted her senses. She had never set foot in such an establishment before, but desperation had a way of dismantling propriety. I apologize for the intrusion," she said, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "My baby and I need shelter from the cold, just for tonight." Several of the men turned away dismissively. Others stared with expressions ranging from suspicion to something darker that made Tabitha's skin crawl. The bartender shook his head without meeting her eyes. "This ain't no place for a woman and child, madam," he said gruffly. "We don't run no charity here." Emma began to fuss more insistently now, her tiny fists balling up as her whimpers threatened to turn into full-blown wails. Tabitha bounced her gently, desperately searching for any sympathetic face in the room. That's when she noticed him. In the far corner sat a broad-shouldered man whose weathered face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat. Unlike the others, he was looking directly at her, his gaze steady and thoughtful. Without a word, he pushed back his chair and cleared the empty plates from the table in front of him. "Madam," he called, his deep voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence. "There's room here if you'd like to sit a spell." Relief flooded through Tabitha so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. With as much dignity as she could muster, she made her way across the sawdust-covered floor, feeling the stares of the other patrons boring into her back. "Thank you, sir," she said softly as she reached his table. "I'm most grateful." "Travis Blackwood," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "And no need for gratitude. Sit before you fall over." Tabitha sank gratefully into the offered chair, adjusting Emma in her arms. The man Travis signaled to the bartender, who approached with visible reluctance. "Bring the lady some stew and bread," Travis said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And some warm milk if you've got it." "We ain't running, no," the bartender began, but Travis cut him off. "Put it on my tab, Joe, and make it quick." The authority in his voice seemed to settle the matter. The bartender retreated with a grunt, and a few of the onlookers returned to their card games and conversations. "You're very kind, Mr. Blackwood," Tabitha said, trying to soothe Emma, who was still fussing. "I promise we won't be a bother. I just needed somewhere warm until morning." Travis studied her for a moment, his blue eyes taking in her worn dress, the thin shawl, and the clearly second-hand baby blanket. His expression remained unreadable beneath his neatly trimmed beard, but something in his gaze softened. "What brings you to Willow Creek, Mrs. Morgan?" "Tabitha Morgan, and this is Emma." She hesitated, unsure how much of her situation to reveal to this stranger. "I was headed west, to Oregon. My husband had a brother there who offered us a place, but—" Her voice faltered. Travis waited patiently, not pressing for details. When the bartender returned with a steaming bowl of stew, a chunk of bread, and a small cup of milk, Tabitha realized how ravenously hungry she was. Still, she attended to Emma first, dipping her finger in the milk to let the baby suckle. "When's the last time you ate, Mrs. Morgan?" Travis asked quietly. "Yesterday morning," she admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "The stagecoach fare took nearly all I had." Travis pushed the bowl closer to her. "Eat. I'll hold the little one if you'd like." Tabitha hesitated, surprised by the offer. This man was a stranger, a kind one, but a stranger nonetheless. Yet there was something in his steady gaze that inspired trust. With careful movements, she passed Emma to him, watching anxiously as his large, calloused hands gently cradled her daughter. To her amazement, Emma quieted almost immediately in Travis's arms, her big blue eyes staring up at his bearded face with apparent fascination. Even more surprising was the natural way he held her, supporting her head properly and rocking her with subtle movements. "You've had experience with babies," Tabitha observed as she began to eat the stew, which tasted better than anything she could remember. A shadow passed over Travis's face. "Long time ago," was all he said. As Tabitha ate, Travis kept Emma entertained, speaking to her in low, gentle tones that seemed incongruous coming from such a rugged man. Watching them, Tabitha felt a curious warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot food. "So you're headed to Oregon," Travis said after a while. "But you're stranded here until the next coach." Tabitha nodded, swallowing a bite of bread, "which I've been told won't arrive for 3 days. The innkeeper had no rooms to spare, or so he claimed when he saw Emma." Travis's jaw tightened. Harlan's always been selective about his guests, but you can't stay here. This is no place for you and the little one. Tabitha's heart sank. For a brief moment, she'd allowed herself to hope that this man's kindness might extend beyond a meal. "I understand," she said, trying to keep the despair from her voice. "Perhaps there's a church in town, or—" "I meant the saloon," Travis interrupted. "My ranch is about 2 miles outside of town. I've got a spare room that you're welcome to use until the coach comes through." Tabitha stared at him, stunned by the offer. "I couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition. The room sits empty, and it'll be a sight warmer than anywhere else you'd find tonight." He glanced down at Emma, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "Besides, this little lady deserves a proper bed, wouldn't you say?" Tabitha knew she should decline. She knew nothing about this man beyond his name and the unexpected kindness he'd shown her. But the alternative was a night in the bitter cold, or perhaps begging for floor space at the church if she could even find it in the dark. "Why would you help us?" she asked finally. "You don't know us." Travis met her gaze directly. "My mother raised me to believe that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." He handed Emma back to her carefully, ensuring the baby didn't wake. "It's nothing more complicated than that, Mrs. Morgan." There was an honesty in his eyes that Tabitha couldn't doubt. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We accept your offer, and I'm truly grateful." Travis stood, leaving coins on the table for their meal. "My wagon's out back. Finish your food, and we'll get you both somewhere warm for the night." As Tabitha followed Travis out of the saloon a few minutes later, cradling Emma close to protect her from the biting wind, she couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had brought her to this place, at this moment, to encounter this particular man. She had lost faith in such things when her husband died, leaving her alone with a newborn and a mountain of debt. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was still some kindness left in this harsh world after all. Travis helped her into the wagon with gentle hands, tucking a thick blanket around her and Emma before climbing up beside her. As the wagon lurched forward into the snowy night, Tabitha felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a small, tentative flicker of hope. Travis Blackwood kept his eyes on the dark road ahead, acutely aware of the woman and child beside him. The snow had begun to fall again, fat flakes drifting down in the light of the lantern hanging from the wagon. He hadn't planned on taking in strays tonight or ever, for that matter. But the moment he'd seen her standing there in the doorway, clutching that baby like it was the last precious thing on earth, something had shifted inside him. He'd recognized the look in her eyes, desperation, mingled with fierce determination. It was the same look his mother had worn in the years after his father died, when she'd struggled to keep their small farm and raise 3 boys alone. The memory was enough to make him offer his help before he'd even thought it through. "It's not much farther now," he said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Just over that ridge ahead." Tabitha Morgan nodded, her eyes scanning the darkness as if trying to make out shapes in the snowy landscape. "Do you live alone, Mr. Blackwood?" A reasonable question from a woman about to enter a stranger's home, Travis thought. "It's just me and my foreman, Hank Miller. He's got a cabin of his own on the property. And there's Mrs. Wilcox, who comes 3 days a week to cook and clean, but she doesn't stay nights." He glanced at her, noting how she seemed to relax slightly at this information. "You'll have privacy in the guest room. It has a door with a lock, if that eases your mind." "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't mean to seem ungrateful or suspicious. It's just, you're being careful." "As you should be." Travis clicked to the horses as they began the gentle climb up the ridge. A woman traveling alone has to be. They crested the hill, and below them, nestled in a protected valley, the outline of Travis's ranch came into view. The main house was substantial but not ostentatious, with light glowing from 2 windows. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and corrals stretched out behind them. "Welcome to Evergreen Ranch," Travis said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Built it with my own hands over the last 10 years. "It's lovely," Tabitha murmured, genuine admiration in her tone. As they drew closer, Travis could see that the lights were on in the main room, which meant Hank was still up. The older man often waited for Travis's return when he went into town, a habit left over from the early days when the territory was more dangerous. Sure enough, the front door opened as Travis pulled the wagon to a stop near the house, and Hank stepped onto the porch, lantern in hand. His weathered face registered surprise at the sight of Tabitha and the baby. "Evening, Travis," he called, coming down the steps to help with the horses. "Didn't expect you'd be bringing company back." "Hank, this is Mrs. Morgan and her daughter Emma," Travis said, jumping down from the wagon. "They'll be staying in the guest room for a few days until the stage comes through." To his credit, Hank didn't ask questions. He simply nodded respectfully to Tabitha as Travis helped her down from the wagon. "Madam, let's get you both inside where it's warm." The house was indeed warm, thanks to the roaring fire in the stone hearth that dominated one wall of the main room. Tabitha looked around, taking in the solid furniture, the woven rugs on the plank floors, and the bookshelves that lined one wall, all signs of permanence and stability that made Travis's home feel instantly welcoming. "The guest room is this way," Travis said, leading her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a simple but comfortable bedroom with a large bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair near the window. "There's extra blankets in the chest there, and I'll bring you some hot water for washing up." Tabitha stepped into the room, her expression one of weary gratitude. "This is more than I could have hoped for, Mr. Blackwood." "Travis, please." He hesitated in the doorway. "Are you hungry? I could ask Hank to fix something else if the stew wasn't enough." She shook her head. "The meal at the saloon was plenty, thank you, but—" She glanced down at Emma, who was beginning to stir again. "I don't suppose you'd have any milk. For Emma, I haven't been able to feed her properly the last few days." The unspoken admission that her own ability to nurse her child had likely been compromised by hunger and stress made something in Travis's chest tighten. "We keep a milk cow. I'll have Hank bring some right away, and there's a bottle somewhere that was used for orphaned calves. It should work for the little one." Relief washed over Tabitha's face. "Thank you, truly." Travis nodded and left her to settle in, finding Hank in the kitchen already heating water for their guest. "Got a story behind this one?" Hank asked quietly as he worked the pump to fill another kettle. "Not much of one that I know," Travis replied, reaching for the clean bottles they kept for feeding orphaned livestock. "She's heading to Oregon, stranded until the stage comes through. No room at the inn, as they say." Hank gave him a knowing look. "And you, being you, couldn't just leave her there." Travis didn't respond directly. "I need you to bring in some fresh milk from Bessie. The baby needs feeding." The older man nodded, but as he headed for the door, he paused. "She's mighty pretty, that Mrs. Morgan." "That's not why I helped her, Hank. Didn't say it was. Just making an observation." Hank grinned before disappearing into the night. Travis busied himself with preparing a tray with the hot water, towels, and a bar of the lavender soap that Mrs. Wilcox insisted on making every spring. By the time he returned to the guest room, Hank had already delivered the milk and bottle, and Travis could hear Tabitha speaking softly to Emma as she fed her. He knocked gently on the half-open door. "I've brought hot water for washing. Please come in," she called. Travis entered to find Tabitha seated in the rocking chair, Emma contentedly suckling at the makeshift bottle. The sight stirred memories he'd long suppressed of another woman, another child, in another lifetime. He set the tray down on the dresser with more force than he'd intended. "Is everything all right?" Tabitha asked, looking up at him. Travis composed himself. "Fine, just tired. It's been a long day." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, accepting his explanation without pressing further. "The milk is perfect. Emma was so hungry, I can't thank you enough." "No need for thanks. Get some rest, Mrs. Morgan. You're safe here." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Tabitha, please call me Tabitha. After all you've done for us, Mrs. Morgan seems unnecessarily formal." Travis looked back at her, at the quiet dignity in her posture despite her circumstances, at the gentle way she cradled her child, at the tentative smile that softened her features. "Good night, Tabitha," he said. "Sleep well." He closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway for a long moment, wondering what exactly he'd gotten himself into by bringing this woman and her child into his home. It had been years since he'd allowed anyone to get close enough to disturb the careful solitude he'd built around himself. Yet in the space of a few hours, Tabitha Morgan had already begun to do just that. With a sigh, Travis headed to his own room, knowing sleep would likely prove elusive tonight. Morning came with gentle persistence, sunlight filtering through the curtains of the guest room where Tabitha lay awake, listening to Emma's soft breathing beside her. She had slept better than she had in months, the combination of a warm, safe room and a full stomach working wonders on her exhausted body. The events of the previous night still seemed somewhat dreamlike. The desperate entrance into the saloon, the cold stares of the patrons, and then Travis Blackwood, with his quiet authority and unexpected kindness. Now she was here in his home, and she wasn't entirely sure what to make of it all. Emma stirred and made a small sound, her tiny fists rubbing at her eyes as she woke. Tabitha leaned over and kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent that was uniquely hers. "Good morning, my love," she whispered. "We had quite an adventure yesterday, didn't we?" After changing Emma's diaper using one of the clean cloths from her rapidly diminishing supply, Tabitha washed her face in the basin of water that had long since cooled and attempted to make herself presentable. Her dress was wrinkled and travel-worn, but at least it was clean, thanks to the hasty washing she'd given it at their last stop. The smell of coffee and something delicious baking drifted under the door, making her stomach growl. Following the enticing aroma, Tabitha made her way to the kitchen with Emma on her hip, where she found not Travis but an older woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a practical bun, her sleeves rolled up as she worked at the stove. "Good morning," Tabitha said hesitantly. The woman turned, revealing a friendly face lined with age and experience. "Ah, there you are. I was wondering when you'd surface. I'm Agnes Wilcox, the housekeeper, and this must be the little angel I've heard about." She wiped her hands on her apron and approached, smiling at Emma. "My, isn't she beautiful, those eyes, like little bits of sky." Tabitha immediately warmed to the woman's forthright manner. "I'm Tabitha Morgan, and this is Emma. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wilcox." "Agnes, please. Mrs. Wilcox makes me sound like my mother-in-law, God rest her soul." She gestured to the table, which was already set for breakfast. "Sit, sit. You look like you could use a good meal. The men have been up for hours. They're out checking on a heifer that's about to calve, but I kept everything warm." As Tabitha settled at the table, Agnes placed a cup of coffee before her and returned to the stove to dish up a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits that made Tabitha's mouth water. "Travis told me about finding you at the saloon last night," Agnes said as she worked. "That Harlan at the inn is a miserable old goat, turning away a mother and child. In my day, such behavior would have been scandalous." "It seems Mr. Blackwood doesn't share Harlan's views," Tabitha said, accepting the loaded plate with thanks. Agnes snorted. "Travis has his gruff exterior, but underneath, he's got the biggest heart in the territory, though he'd probably shoot me for saying so." She winked, then reached for Emma. "May I hold this little darling while you eat? It's been too long since I've had a baby in my arms." Tabitha hesitated only briefly before passing Emma over. Agnes received her with practiced ease, cooing and bouncing as she moved around the kitchen. "Travis mentioned you're headed to Oregon," Agnes asked, settling into a chair across from Tabitha with Emma contentedly perched on her knee. "Yes. My husband's brother has a farm near Portland. He wrote after James, my husband, died, offering us a place to stay and work." Tabitha focused on cutting her eggs, avoiding Agnes's sympathetic gaze. It seemed the best option for Emma's future. "And when did you lose your husband, dear?" 6 months ago. Influenza." Tabitha swallowed hard against the memory. Emma was only a few days old when he fell ill. He never really got to know her. Agnes reached across the table to pat Tabitha's hand. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's a hard road you've been walking, especially with a little one." Tabitha nodded, grateful for the woman's understanding. "We're managing, one day at a time." "Well, you're welcome here until the stage comes," Agnes assured her. "And I'm here most days if you need anything or just want company." Travis keeps to himself a lot, and Hank's a good man but not much of a conversationalist. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the door opened and Travis entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. His eyes found Tabitha immediately, and something in his expression shifted, a softening that was quickly masked, but not before she noticed it. "Good morning," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Tabitha replied, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "Your home is most comfortable." Travis nodded, accepting a cup of coffee from Agnes. "Glad to hear it." He glanced at Emma, who was babbling happily at Agnes. "The little one seems in good spirits." "Babies know when they're in good hands," Agnes declared, bouncing Emma on her knee. "And this one's a natural charmer. Just look at those dimples." A faint smile touched Travis's lips as he watched the baby. "Hank's going to be in town most of the day picking up supplies. I need to check the south pasture fence line." He looked at Tabitha. "Is there anything you need? Agnes can make a list for Hank." Tabitha hesitated. She needed many things: diapers for Emma, soap, perhaps some thread to mend her dress, but she had precious little money left. "I wouldn't want to impose further." "It's no imposition," Travis interrupted. "Just tell Agnes what you need." Before Tabitha could protest, he had drained his coffee and was heading back outside, pausing only to add, "I should be back by midday if you need anything else." After he'd gone, Agnes chuckled. "That man, always rushing off before anyone can thank him properly, been that way as long as I've known him." "How long have you worked for Mr. Blackwood?" Tabitha asked, curious about her enigmatic host. "Going on 8 years now," Agnes replied, adjusting Emma on her lap. "Started coming around to help when he was first building this place. Back then, it was just a one-room cabin and big dreams." She gazed around the now substantial house with approval. "He's done well for himself. Built all this from nothing but hard work and determination." "He seems private," Tabitha observed carefully. Agnes's expression grew more serious. "Travis has had his share of sorrows. Lost his first wife and baby during childbirth about 12 years ago before he came to these parts. He doesn't speak of it, but Hank told me once, years back." Tabitha's heart constricted at this revelation. It explained the shadow she'd seen pass over Travis's face when she'd mentioned his experience with babies, and the way he'd handled Emma with such care yet distance. "That's terrible," she said softly. "Life can be cruel," Agnes agreed. "But Travis found his way through it, poured himself into building this ranch. He's respected throughout the territory, fair in his dealings, generous to those in need, though he'd never admit to it." She smiled down at Emma, who had grabbed hold of her finger. "Which is why I wasn't the least bit surprised when Hank told me Travis had brought home a stranded mother and child. It's just the kind of man he is." Tabitha finished her breakfast thoughtfully, watching as Agnes entertained Emma. Despite the tragedy in his past, or perhaps because of it, Travis Blackwood had extended kindness to her and Emma when they needed it most. It was a debt she couldn't repay, but she resolved to at least not be a burden during their brief stay. "Agnes," she said finally, "would it be possible for me to help you today, with the housework or cooking? I'd like to earn my keep, even if just a little." Agnes studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "I never turn down an extra pair of hands. And I imagine you're not the type to sit idle anyway." "No," Tabitha agreed with a small smile. "I've never been very good at that. Then we'll work together and the day will pass quickly. And perhaps," Agnes added with a twinkle in her eye, "we might even coax another smile or two from our serious Mr. Blackwood before supper time." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm at the woman's knowing look, but she didn't contradict her. Instead, she rose to clear the breakfast dishes, already feeling more purposeful than she had in months. For just a few days, she and Emma had found a safe harbor in the storm of their circumstances. And even if it was temporary, Tabitha was determined to make the most of it. The sun was high overhead when Travis returned from inspecting the fence line. He dismounted in the yard, patting his horse's neck as he surveyed his property with quiet satisfaction. The ranch had prospered beyond his expectations over the years, growing from a small homestead to one of the more successful operations in the territory. It was a testament to hard work and persistence, and perhaps a bit of the good fortune that had otherwise seemed to elude him in life. As he led his horse to the stable, He noticed something unusual hanging on the clothesline behind the house, small white squares of fabric fluttering in the breeze. Drawing closer, he realized they were diapers for the baby, freshly washed and drying in the winter sun. The sight gave him an odd feeling. It had been many years since such domestic evidence of a child had been present on his property. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember another time, another life, when he and Sarah had prepared for their baby's arrival with such hope and joy. The pain of those memories had dulled over the years, but they had never truly faded. Shaking off the melancholy that threatened to overtake him, Travis continued to the stable to care for his horse. By the time he finished and made his way to the house, the rich smell of beef stew greeted him, along with the sound of women's voices and most surprising laughter. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. Agnes stood at the stove stirring a large pot, while Tabitha sat at the table rolling out dough for what appeared to be pie crust. Emma lay on a blanket on the floor nearby, kicking her legs enthusiastically and grasping at a wooden spoon that Agnes had likely given her to play with. It was a picture of domestic tranquility that Travis hadn't witnessed in his home since, well, ever. Even in the early days with Sarah, they'd never had the chance to create such scenes before tragedy struck. Agnes noticed him first. "There you are, right on time. Lunch is nearly ready." Tabitha looked up, a streak of flour across one cheek and her hair escaping from its pins. The sight of her relaxed and at ease in his kitchen did something peculiar to Travis's insides. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted him with a smile. "I hope you don't mind that I've invaded your kitchen." "Agnes has been kind enough to let me help." "Not at all," he replied, removing his hat. "And I thought we'd agreed on Travis." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Travis, then. Agnes has been teaching me her secret apple pie recipe. She says it's your favorite." "That it is," he confirmed, hanging his hat and coat by the door. "Though she guards that recipe like gold." Agnes chuckled. "Tabitha earned it fair and square by helping me tackle that mountain of mending you've been ignoring for months. The girl has a gift with a needle." Travis raised an eyebrow. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Tabitha said simply. "It's the least I could do to repay your hospitality." Travis wanted to tell her that no repayment was necessary, but something in her expression stopped him. There was pride there, a dignity that wouldn't allow her to accept charity without offering something in return. He respected that. "Well, I'm obliged," he said instead. "Especially if it means apple pie for supper." His response was rewarded with another smile from Tabitha before she returned her attention to the dough. Travis washed up at the basin, acutely aware of her presence in a way that was both unfamiliar and unsettling. It had been a long time since a woman other than Agnes had occupied his home, and never one who affected him quite like Tabitha Morgan seemed to. Lunch was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Agnes had made her hearty beef stew with dumplings, and the conversation flowed easily between the three adults, with Emma providing occasional commentary in the form of coos and babbles from her blanket. "Hank should be back from town before sundown," Travis mentioned as they ate. "He'll bring whatever supplies you asked for." "Thank you," Tabitha said. "I tried to keep the list modest." "No need for that," Travis assured her. "Whatever you and the baby require, just ask." After lunch, Agnes took her leave, as she usually did in the afternoons, to tend to her own small cottage on the other side of town. Travis found himself alone with Tabitha and Emma for the first time since their arrival. An awkward silence settled between them until Emma broke it with a discontented cry. Tabitha immediately went to her, lifting her from the blanket. "I think someone needs changing," she said, a note of apology in her voice. "Excuse us for a moment." When she returned with a freshly changed Emma, Travis was clearing the lunch dishes from the table. Tabitha hesitated in the doorway, watching him work. "You don't strike me as the typical bachelor rancher," she observed. Travis glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "How so?" "Your home. It's so orderly, comfortable. Most unmarried men I've known lived in something closer to organized chaos." A faint smile touched his lips. "Agnes wouldn't allow chaos, organized or otherwise, and I've found I prefer things in their proper place." Tabitha nodded, bouncing Emma gently as the baby began to fuss again. "She's likely hungry. Would it be possible to get some more milk for her?" "Of course." Travis dried his hands and reached for his coat. "I'll bring some fresh from the barn." When he returned with the milk, Tabitha had settled in the rocking chair near the fire in the main room, Emma cradled in her arms. Travis handed her the bottle he'd prepared, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The contact, innocent as it was, sent an unexpected jolt through him. "Thank you," she said softly, seemingly unaffected by the touch that had disturbed his equilibrium. Travis took a seat in the armchair opposite her, watching as she fed Emma. There was something profoundly intimate about the scene, this woman caring for her child in the warm light of his hearth. It stirred feelings he'd thought long buried. "May I ask you something, Travis?" Tabitha's voice broke into his thoughts. "You may." She hesitated, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Agnes mentioned that you built this ranch from nothing. What brought you to this particular place? It seems remote." Travis considered her question, deciding how much to reveal. "After my wife died, I couldn't stay where we'd been. Too many memories." He kept his tone even, factual. "I traveled west, worked cattle drives for a few years, saved every penny. When I came through this valley, something about it felt right. The land was available for a fair price, had good water access, decent grazing. It was practical." He didn't mention how the valley's sheltered beauty had been the first thing since Sarah's death to make him feel something other than grief and anger. How building the ranch had given him purpose when he'd been dangerously close to losing himself entirely. "I understand the need for a fresh start," Tabitha said, her gaze on Emma rather than him. "After James died, I couldn't bear to stay in our home either. Everything reminded me of him, of our plans, of what should have been." The raw honesty in her voice resonated with Travis in a way few things had in years. "How did you manage?" "With a newborn and all, one day at a time," she replied simply. "There were moments I thought I couldn't go on, but then Emma would need feeding or changing or comforting, and I'd find the strength somewhere." She looked up at him then, her eyes clear and direct. "Life has a way of pushing forward, even when we think we can't." Travis nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. "That it does." They fell into a companionable silence broken only by Emma's soft, suckling sounds. Travis found himself studying Tabitha's profile, the gentle curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw, the tenderness in her eyes as she gazed at her daughter. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a resilience about her that spoke to something deep within him. "Travis," she said after a while, her voice hesitant, "I've been thinking. The stage doesn't come for 2 more days, and I don't want to be idle. Is there work I could do around the ranch to earn my keep?" "You don't need to earn your keep, Tabitha. You're a guest." She shook her head. "I've never been comfortable accepting charity. James always said I was too proud for my own good, but it matters to me, to contribute." Travis considered her request, recognizing and respecting the pride that drove it. Agnes could likely use help with the mending and such. "And if you're inclined, there are some account books that could use organizing. I'm not much for paperwork." Relief softened her features. "I'd be happy to help with the books. I kept all the accounts for my father's store before I married, and later for James's carpentry business. You have experience with bookkeeping. Travis was genuinely surprised and impressed. That's a useful skill. My father believed girls should be educated the same as boys, she explained. He taught me figures and accounting alongside my brothers. It scandalized some in our town, but he never cared much for others' opinions. A man ahead of his time, Travis commented, finding himself increasingly curious about the path that had led Tabitha Morgan to his doorstep. He was. A wistful smile touched her lips. He would have adored Emma. He always wanted grandchildren, but he died before any of us provided them. Emma had finished her milk and was now drowsing in Tabitha's arms, her tiny rosebud mouth slack with contentment. Travis watched as Tabitha gently wiped a drop of milk from the baby's chin with a tenderness that made his chest ache. "She's lucky to have you," he said quietly. Tabitha looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "Thank you. Sometimes I worry I'm not enough for her. From what I've seen, you're exactly what she needs." The words emerged before Travis could consider them, but he found he meant them sincerely. A flush spread across Tabitha's cheeks, and she ducked her head slightly. "That's kind of you to say." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed ready to acknowledge. Finally, Travis stood, needing to put some distance between himself and the unfamiliar emotions Tabitha stirred in him. "I should check on that heifer again. The account books are in my study when you're ready. Take your time." As he strode from the house, Travis took a deep breath of the cold winter air, trying to clear his head. Tabitha Morgan and her daughter would be gone in 2 days, continuing their journey west to start a new life far from here. That was for the best. He had built his life carefully, structured it precisely to avoid the kind of pain that had nearly destroyed him years ago. Yet as he made his way to the barn, Travis couldn't help but glance back at the house, where golden light spilled from the windows, and where, for the first time in years, it felt like a home rather than merely a place to live. The remainder of the day passed in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. After Emma woke from her nap, Tabitha settled at Travis's desk in his study, the baby contentedly playing with a soft cloth doll Agnes had fashioned for her from scraps. The account books were in good order but needed updating, and Tabitha lost herself in the familiar work of balancing figures and organizing receipts. She was impressed by the ranch's operation. Travis clearly ran a profitable business, with careful attention to expenses and investments. The records showed growth year over year: new land purchases, expanding herds, improvements to the property. It was the work of a man who planned for the future, who built with purpose and foresight. When Hank returned from town late in the afternoon, he brought not only the basic supplies Tabitha had requested, but also a small wooden teething ring for Emma, and a length of pretty blue fabric that Agnes insisted could be made into a new dress for Tabitha. "This is too much," Tabitha protested as Agnes laid out the fabric on the kitchen table. "Nonsense," the older woman replied firmly. "That dress you're wearing is about to give up the ghost, and Travis can certainly afford a few yards of fabric. Besides, it matches your eyes." Tabitha ran her fingers over the soft cotton, a lump forming in her throat at the kindness. It had been so long since anyone had done something simply to make her happy rather than out of necessity. "Thank you," she managed, blinking back tears. "Both of you." Hank shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion. "Weren't nothing, madam, just following orders." "Orders?" Tabitha glanced at Agnes, who smiled mysteriously. "Travis might have mentioned that you could use a few things beyond what was on your list," Agnes explained. "He left the details to me." Before Tabitha could process this information, the man himself entered the kitchen, stamping snow from his boots. His eyes landed on the fabric spread across the table, then moved to Tabitha's face, taking in her slightly teary expression. "Everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. "Yes," Tabitha assured him quickly. "I was just overwhelmed by your generosity. The fabric is beautiful." Travis seemed relieved. "Good. Agnes has a good eye for such things." He hung up his coat and turned to Hank. "The heifer calved healthy bull calf." "They're both doing fine." The conversation shifted to ranch matters then, and Tabitha busied herself with helping Agnes prepare supper, her mind turning over this new revelation. Travis had noticed her worn dress and thought to provide for a new one, yet had done so in a way that preserved her dignity by having Agnes handle the details. It was thoughtful in a way that touched her deeply. Supper that evening was a lively affair, with Hank regaling them with news and gossip from town. Tabitha found herself laughing more than she had in months, with Emma passed from lap to lap as everyone took turns holding her so Tabitha could eat. "Harlan at the inn was asking about you," Hank mentioned at one point, glancing at Tabitha. "Seemed mighty curious about where you'd gone after he turned you away." Travis's expression darkened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing specific," Hank assured him. "Just said you'd help the lady find proper accommodations, as any decent man would do." He winked at Tabitha. "Might have mentioned that not everyone in these parts lacks basic Christian charity." "Hank," Agnes chided, though her eyes twinkled with approval. "What?" The foreman looked unrepentant. "Man deserved to feel a bit of shame for turning away a mother and child in winter." Tabitha felt a rush of gratitude for these people who had so quickly taken her and Emma under their protection. "Thank you, Hank, though I hope it doesn't cause trouble for Travis in town." Travis snorted. "Harlan's opinion means less than nothing to me, and most folks around here know what he's like." After supper, Tabitha insisted on helping with the dishes while Agnes put the finishing touches on the apple pie. Travis and Hank retreated to the main room, where the sound of their low conversation mingled with the crackling of the fire. "You've made quite an impression," Agnes observed quietly as they worked side by side at the sink. "What do you mean?" Tabitha asked, though she felt her cheeks warming. Agnes gave her a knowing look. "On Travis, I haven't seen him this engaged in years. He's usually much more distant, especially with strangers." Tabitha focused intently on the plate she was drying. "He's simply being kind to someone in need." Agnes hummed noncommittally. "If you say so, dear." Before Tabitha could formulate a response, Emma began to fuss from her makeshift bed on the blanket nearby. Grateful for the interruption, Tabitha dried her hands and went to her daughter. "Someone's ready for bed, I think," she said, lifting Emma into her arms. As if on cue, the baby yawned widely, her tiny fists rubbing at her eyes. The sight never failed to melt Tabitha's heart, no matter how many times she witnessed it. "I should take her to our room," Tabitha said. "Please thank Travis again for everything." Agnes nodded, but as Tabitha turned to leave, the older woman added softly, "You know, I've been working for Travis Blackwood for 8 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when you're not watching." Tabitha's step faltered, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't allow herself to contemplate what Agnes was suggesting. In less than 2 days, she and Emma would be on the stagecoach heading west, leaving Evergreen Ranch and its owner behind. Whatever connection she might feel forming between them was irrelevant in the face of that reality. Yet as she settled Emma for the night and prepared for bed herself, Tabitha couldn't help but wonder about the way Travis had looked at her across the supper table, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and something deeper that had made her heart beat faster. She had been so focused on survival since James's death that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a woman, not just as a widow or a mother. She pushed the thought away as she climbed into bed. Travis Blackwood's kindness was a blessing, but allowing herself to develop feelings for him would be foolish. Their paths had crossed briefly, nothing more. By this time the day after tomorrow, she would be miles away, continuing the journey toward the future she had planned for herself and Emma. Still, as sleep claimed her, Tabitha found herself dreaming of blue eyes watching her from across a warmly lit room, and strong hands gently cradling her daughter. The following morning dawned clear and cold, the sun reflecting brilliantly off the snow-covered landscape. Travis had been up since before first light, his sleep disturbed by dreams he couldn't quite remember upon waking, but that left him restless and on edge. He'd gone to the barn early, losing himself in the familiar routine of feeding and caring for the animals. Physical labor had always been his refuge when his thoughts became too complicated, and today was no exception. By the time the sun was fully up, he had already mucked out several stalls and was working on repairing a broken gate hinge when Hank found him. "You're up early," the foreman commented, leaning against the stall door. "Thought you might sleep in a bit, what with the evening we had." Travis grunted in response, focusing on the hinge. "Nice having a full table at supper time," Hank continued, undeterred by Travis's lack of response. "Reminds me of when I was a boy. Everyone gathered around, talking and laughing. Makes a house feel more like a home." Travis paused in his work to give Hank a pointed look. "You going somewhere with this, old man?" Hank shrugged, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just making conversation. Though I will say Mrs. Morgan seems like a fine woman, strong, smart, pretty too." "She's leaving tomorrow," Travis said flatly, returning to the hinge. "Heading to Oregon where she's got family waiting." Hank scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Funny thing about plans, sometimes they change." Travis set down his tools with more force than necessary. "Hank." The warning in his tone was clear, but Hank had known Travis too long to be intimidated. "All I'm saying is, opportunities don't always announce themselves with trumpets. Sometimes they just show up at your saloon table with a baby on their hip." Before Travis could formulate a suitably cutting response, the sound of the barn door opening drew both men's attention. Tabitha stood in the entrance, Emma bundled against her chest, the morning light casting a golden halo around them. "Good morning," she called, stepping into the relative warmth of the barn. "Agnes said I might find you both out here." Travis straightened, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair probably sticking out in all directions, hands dirty from his work. "Morning, Mrs. Morgan," Hank greeted her cheerfully. "What brings you and the little miss out to the barn so early?" "Emma was fussing to go outside," Tabitha explained, approaching them. "She's always been curious about everything. I thought we might explore a bit if that's all right, of course," Travis said, finding his voice. "Though it's cold out, are you warm enough?" Tabitha smiled, gesturing to the thick shawl wrapped around her and Emma. "Agnes insisted we borrow this. It's wonderfully warm." Travis recognized the shawl as one Agnes had knitted several winters ago, a gift he'd given her that she rarely used, claiming it was too fine for everyday wear. The dark blue wool suited Tabitha, bringing out the color in her eyes. Hank cleared his throat. "Well, I should get started on the north pasture fence. Travis, you can show Mrs. Morgan and Emma around, can't you?" Before Travis could object, Hank had grabbed his coat and hat and was striding out of the barn, whistling a jaunty tune. The man's lack of subtlety was almost painful. "I don't mean to interrupt your work," Tabitha said, noticing Travis's tools on the ground. "You're not," he assured her, wiping his hands on a rag. "I was just finishing up." Emma chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, her little arms reaching toward a nearby stall where one of the horses had stuck its head out curiously. "She loves animals," Tabitha explained with a fond smile. "Our neighbor in St. Louis had a cat that would visit our window and Emma would watch it for hours." Travis approached them, gesturing toward the horse. "That's Daisy. She's gentle as they come. Would Emma like to pet her?" Tabitha looked uncertain. "Is it safe? She's so small." "I'll hold her," Travis offered, "if you're comfortable with that." After a moment's hesitation, Tabitha nodded and carefully transferred Emma to Travis's arms. The baby went willingly, her blue eyes wide with interest as Travis supported her securely against his chest. "Here we go, little one," he said softly, moving closer to the stall. "This is Daisy. She's a good horse." Emma stared at the mare in fascination, letting out another excited sound. Travis gently took her tiny hand in his and guided it to Daisy's soft nose. The baby's expression of wonder as she felt the horse's velvety muzzle made something inside Travis shift and expand. Tabitha watched them, her expression a mixture of tenderness and something else Travis couldn't quite identify. "She trusts you," she said quietly. "She's usually shy with strangers." "Animals and babies," Travis replied, keeping his tone light. "They've always taken to me for some reason." He didn't add that it had been years since he'd allowed himself to hold a child, that the warm weight of Emma in his arms was simultaneously painful and healing. For the next half hour, Travis showed Tabitha and Emma around the barn, introducing them to the various horses and the milk cow, Bessie, who seemed particularly interested in Emma's reaching hands. The baby's obvious delight in the animals was infectious, and Travis found himself smiling more than he had in longer than he could remember. "She's going to be an adventurous one," he commented as Emma tried to grab at a piece of hay floating in the air. "Like her father," Tabitha said with a hint of sadness. "James was always planning our next adventure. He wanted to see everything, do everything." She sighed softly. "I sometimes worry that Emma won't have that same opportunity for excitement and discovery with just me raising her." Travis studied her profile as she gazed at her daughter. "I think you sell yourself short, Tabitha. You've already shown more courage and determination than most men I know traveling across the country alone with an infant, starting fresh in a new place. Emma will learn plenty about adventure and bravery just from watching her mother." Tabitha looked up at him, surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Travis. That means a great deal to me." Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Travis became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of Emma in his arms creating a bridge between them. The moment was broken by the barn door opening again, revealing Agnes bundled against the cold. "There you all are," she called. "I've got breakfast ready and it's getting cold. Tabitha, I've set up the sewing machine for your dress after we eat." "Coming, Agnes," Tabitha replied, reaching for Emma. As Travis transferred the baby back to her mother, their hands brushed, and that same jolt of awareness he'd felt the day before ran through him. "Thank you for the tour," Tabitha said, her voice slightly unsteady. Emma enjoyed it tremendously. Travis nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as she followed Agnes back to the house, Emma's small face peering over her mother's shoulder, one tiny hand raised as if in farewell. Only when they were out of sight did Travis let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Hank's words from earlier echoed in his mind. "Sometimes they just show up at your saloon table with a baby on their hip." The problem wasn't that Travis didn't recognize the opportunity standing in front of him. It was that he wasn't sure he deserved it, or that he had the courage to reach for it after all these years of careful isolation. With a sigh, he picked up his tools and set them away properly. There was work to be done, regardless of the conflict in his heart. And tomorrow, Tabitha and Emma would be gone, making the whole question moot. Yet as he made his way back to the house for breakfast, Travis couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world, something that wouldn't be easily set right again after they departed. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. After breakfast, Tabitha worked with Agnes on her new dress, the older woman's expertise with the sewing machine making quick work of the project. By midday, Tabitha had a serviceable and surprisingly pretty dress that fit her properly, the first new garment she'd had since before Emma's birth. "It's perfect," she declared, twirling once in the kitchen to show Agnes the result. "I don't know how to thank you." "Seeing you smile is thanks enough," Agnes replied warmly. "Besides, it does these old bones good to pass on my sewing knowledge to someone who appreciates it." In the afternoon, Tabitha returned to Travis's account books while Emma napped. She found the work soothing, a reminder of her capabilities beyond motherhood, of the woman she had been before grief had reshaped her life. When she finished, the books were updated, organized, and ready for the new year. Travis had been scarce most of the day, out with Hank tending to ranch business. Tabitha told herself it was for the best. The connection she'd felt with him that morning in the barn had unsettled her, making her question the path she'd committed to for herself and Emma. Such doubts were dangerous and impractical. Her brother-in-law was expecting them in Oregon. He had work waiting for her, a place for them to live. It was the sensible plan, the responsible choice for Emma's future. Still, as evening approached and Agnes prepared to leave for the day, Tabitha found herself watching the window, waiting for Travis's return with an anticipation she didn't want to examine too closely. "He'll be in soon," Agnes said knowingly as she donned her coat. "Travis never misses supper if he can help it." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm at being so transparent. "I just wanted to thank him again before we leave tomorrow, and show him the work I did on his accounts." "Hum," Agnes hummed, clearly unconvinced. "Well, I've left stew simmering for supper. The bread's wrapped in the cloth on the counter, and there's another apple pie keeping warm in the oven." "You didn't have to go to all that trouble," Tabitha protested. Agnes waved away her concern. "It's your last night here. Deserve something special." She paused at the door, her expression growing serious. "You know, Tabitha, sometimes the path we think we should follow isn't the one that leads us home." Before Tabitha could respond to this cryptic statement, Agnes had slipped out into the gathering dusk, leaving her alone with a sleeping Emma, and a house that, in just 2 days, had begun to feel distressingly like somewhere she belonged. To distract herself from such dangerous thoughts, Tabitha busied herself with packing their few belongings for tomorrow's journey. The stage would arrive mid-morning, according to Hank, and Travis had already offered to drive them into town. By this time tomorrow, Willow Creek would be miles behind them, and Evergreen Ranch just a brief, bright memory in the long journey of their lives. The thought brought an unexpected lump to her throat. How strange, she reflected, that a place and people who had been unknown to her 3 days ago could now feel so significant. But that was the nature of kindness. Perhaps it left marks on the heart far deeper than its duration would suggest. The sound of the front door opening and closing, followed by the stomping of boots on the porch, alerted her to Travis's return. Taking a deep breath to compose herself, Tabitha checked on Emma once more before making her way to the kitchen. Travis stood at the wash basin, his back to her as he cleaned up from the day's work. In the golden lamplight, with his shirt sleeves rolled up revealing strong forearms. He presented a picture of quiet masculine strength that made Tabitha's heart beat a little faster. "Welcome back," she said, and he turned at the sound of her voice. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance in the new blue dress. The dress suits you," he said finally. "Thank you. Agnes is a miracle worker with a needle and thread." Tabitha moved to the stove, lifting the lid on the stew pot. "Are you hungry? Supper's ready whenever you are," Travis nodded, drying his hands. "Starving, actually. Hank decided to head into town for the night, something about a card game he's been wanting to join." A faint smile touched his lips. "Though I suspect he's just giving you some peace and quiet on your last night." The slight slip wasn't lost on Tabitha, but she chose not to acknowledge it. "That was thoughtful of him, though I've enjoyed his company. Both of you have been so kind to Emma and me." Travis shrugged, the gesture dismissive but not unkind. It wasn't nothing," Tabitha countered gently. "Not to us." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Emma's cry from the bedroom broke the spell, and Tabitha turned away. "I'll get her. She's probably hungry." By the time she returned with Emma, Travis had set the table and was ladling stew into bowls. The domesticity of the scene, the table set for two, the steaming food, the man waiting for her, and the baby created a picture that was achingly reminiscent of the life Tabitha had once dreamed of with James, and simultaneously something entirely new and unexplored. "I hope she's not disruptive," Tabitha said as she settled Emma on her lap. "Not at all," Travis assured her, taking his seat across from her. "I've enjoyed having her around. The house feels different with a child in it." Something in his tone made Tabitha look up sharply. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was a depth of emotion in his eyes that suggested his thoughts had turned to his own loss, the child he never had the chance to raise. "Agnes told me," she said softly, "about your wife and baby. I'm so sorry, Travis." He stilled, his spoon halfway to his mouth. For a moment, Tabitha feared she had overstepped, but then he set the spoon down and met her gaze directly. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice low. She was everything to me. When she died, taking our son with her, I thought my life was over." He took a breath, as if steeling himself to continue. "In some ways it was. The life I'd planned, the future I'd imagined that ended the day I buried them." Tabitha's heart ached for him, recognizing the raw grief that still lingered beneath his composed exterior. "I understand," she said simply. "When James died, I felt the same. Like the world had ended, but somehow I was still expected to go on living in it." Travis nodded, acknowledgement of their shared experience passing between them. "How did you do it? Find the strength to keep going?" Tabitha glanced down at Emma, who was contentedly playing with a spoon. "I had no choice. Emma needed me, and in a way that saved me. I couldn't give up when there was this perfect, innocent being depending on me entirely." She looked back at Travis. "What about you? How did you find your way forward?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Work at first. I threw myself into it, took jobs that were dangerous, exhausting anything to keep from thinking. Then gradually I started to build something again, this ranch." He gestured around them. "It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life. A good one, even." "But a solitary one," Tabitha observed gently. Travis's gaze was steady. "Yes, by choice. I'd learned how much it could hurt to lose someone you loved. Seemed safer not to love at all." The honesty of his admission hung in the air between them, charged with implications neither was ready to voice. Tabitha busied herself with helping Emma with a bit of softened bread, giving herself time to process his words. "I understand that impulse," she said finally. "After James, I couldn't imagine ever opening my heart to that kind of vulnerability again. The risk seemed unbearable. She met Travis's eyes. But lately, I've wondered if perhaps the greater risk is in never trying, in closing oneself off from the possibility of joy as well as pain. Travis studied her face, his expression unreadable. "And what conclusion have you reached?" Tabitha smiled faintly. "I'm still deciding." The conversation shifted then to lighter topics: the ranch, the town, stories of Agnes and Hank that made Tabitha laugh. They shared the apple pie for dessert, and Travis insisted on cleaning up while Tabitha settled Emma for the night. When she returned to the main room, she found Travis standing by the fireplace, gazing into the flames. He turned at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart quicken. "I finished organizing your account books," she said, filling the silence. "Everything's up to date through December. Thank you. I appreciate that." He hesitated, then added, "You have a good head for figures." "I enjoy it, actually. There's something satisfying about balancing accounts, having everything in its proper place." Travis nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I understand that sentiment." Another silence fell between them, this one loaded with all the things that remained unsaid. Tabitha knew she should excuse herself, go to bed, prepare for tomorrow's departure. Yet she found herself rooted to the spot, unwilling to end this last evening with Travis. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked suddenly. "Or perhaps something stronger? I have a decent whiskey that Hank gave me for Christmas." Tabitha smiled. "Coffee would be lovely, thank you." As Travis busied himself with the coffee pot, Tabitha moved to the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky above the snow-covered landscape. Evergreen Ranch was truly beautiful. She reflected a haven carved out of the wilderness by one man's determination and vision. "It must have been challenging," she said, not turning from the window, "building all this on your own." Travis approached, handing her a steaming cup. "It was, but worth it. You should be proud." She accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "You've created something remarkable here. Thank you." He stood beside her at the window, both of them gazing out at the night. "What about your brother-in-law's place in Oregon? What sort of farm does he have?" Tabitha sipped her coffee before answering. "Wheat, primarily, and some livestock. James always spoke highly of it, though I've never seen it myself. And he's expecting you when? In the spring. I wrote to him from St. Louis when I sold our house and decided to make the journey. The plan is to work as his housekeeper initially and perhaps help with the accounts." She paused. "His wife died 2 years ago, so he has need of someone to manage the household." Travis turned to look at her directly. "Is that what you want, Tabitha? To be his housekeeper?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "It's a practical arrangement. Emma and I will have a home, security. Harold James's brother is a good man by all accounts." "That doesn't answer my question." Tabitha met his gaze, finding it impossible to dissemble under the intensity of those blue eyes. "What I want seems less important than what Emma needs. Security. Stability. A future. And you believe this arrangement in Oregon is the best way to provide those things." There was something in his tone, not challenging exactly, but probing, that made Tabitha consider her answer carefully. "Until recently, yes. It seemed the most sensible path forward." "And now?" Travis asked, his voice softening. Tabitha took a deep breath. "Now I'm not certain. These past few days have reminded me that there might be other possibilities I hadn't considered." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken implications. Travis set down his coffee cup, his movements deliberate. "Tabitha," he began, then stopped, as if searching for the right words. "I know we've only known each other a very short time, and what I'm about to say may seem presumptuous or even foolish. but a sudden, frantic knocking at the door cut him off. They both turned, startled by the interruption. Travis frowned, moving quickly to answer it. Hank stood on the porch, his expression grim, snow dusting his shoulders. "Travis, there's trouble. The stage that was supposed to come through tomorrow, it won't be coming." "What happened?" Travis demanded, ushering his foreman inside. "Accident about 40 miles east of here. Bridge collapsed under the weight of the coach. No one was badly hurt, but the coach is damaged beyond immediate repair. They're saying it'll be at least 2 weeks before they can get another one on this route." Tabitha's hand flew to her mouth. 2 weeks, Hank nodded apologetically. "I'm afraid so, madam. I came straight back when I heard, figuring you'd need to know." Travis turned to Tabitha, his expression a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't quite identify. "It seems your departure has been delayed." Yes." Tabitha's mind raced. 2 more weeks at Evergreen Ranch. 2 more weeks with Travis. The thought should have distressed her a further delay in her carefully laid plans, but instead, she felt a flutter of something that felt dangerously like relief. "You're welcome to stay here, of course," Travis said quickly. "For as long as you need to." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Tabitha knew that the decision before her was about much more than a delayed stagecoach. It was about the path her life would take from this point forward, and whether she had the courage to consider possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. "Thank you," she said softly. "We would be grateful to stay." As Hank excused himself to check on his horse, leaving them alone again, Travis took a step toward Tabitha. "What I was about to say before Hank arrived, perhaps," Tabitha interrupted gently. "We should both get some rest. It seems we have more time now to consider things." Travis studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Travis." As she made her way to the guest room, Tabitha's mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions. The practical part of her recognized that this delay was an inconvenience, a disruption to her plans. But another part, a part she had thought long dormant, whispered that perhaps this wasn't a delay at all, but an opportunity. A chance to explore the connection that had formed so unexpectedly between her and Travis Blackwood. 2 weeks, she thought as she checked on Emma's sleeping form. 2 weeks to decide what kind of future she truly wanted for herself and her daughter. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Tabitha found herself slipping into life at Evergreen Ranch with an ease that both comforted and alarmed her. Each morning, she would wake with Emma, join Travis for breakfast, then help Agnes with household tasks while Travis and Hank tended to the ranch. Afternoons often found her working on the books or sewing while Emma napped, and evenings were spent in the warm glow of the fireplace, conversing with Travis long after Hank had retired to his cabin. It was during these evening conversations that Tabitha truly came to know Travis Blackwood. He spoke of his childhood in Tennessee, of his parents and 2 brothers, of his dreams of the West that had led him to leave home at 17. He told her of meeting Sarah when he was 20, of their whirlwind courtship, and 2 happy years of marriage before tragedy struck. And he spoke of the dark years that followed, when he had drifted westward, taking increasingly dangerous jobs because he barely cared whether he lived or died. In turn, Tabitha shared her own story, her sheltered upbringing as the only daughter among 4 children, her father's progressive ideas about education, her marriage to James, who had been her brother's best friend and had courted her for 3 years before she agreed to marry him. She spoke of their plans to start a family, of James's thriving carpentry business, and then of the devastating influenza that had swept through their community, taking James just days after Emma's birth. "I was still recovering from childbirth when he fell ill," she told Travis one evening, her voice soft with remembrance. By the time I realized how serious it was too late. He died holding Emma, telling me to be brave, to carry on for her sake. Travis's hand covered hers where it rested on the sofa between them. You have carried on, with remarkable strength. His touch was warm, reassuring, and Tabitha found herself turning her hand over to lace her fingers with his. It was the first such contact they had shared, and it sent a tremor through her that was both thrilling and terrifying. Sometimes I don't feel very strong, she admitted. Sometimes I'm just tired, scared, uncertain. That doesn't mean you aren't strong, Travis said, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. It just means you're human. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Tabitha was acutely aware of his proximity, of the steady rise and fall of his chest, of the way the firelight cast shadows across his features, softening them. "Travis," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say but feeling the need to break the charged silence. Before she could continue, Emma's cry echoed from the bedroom. Tabitha withdrew her hand reluctantly. "I should check on her," Travis nodded, rising with her. "Of course." As she turned to go, he caught her arm gently. "Tabitha." She looked back, her heart racing at the intensity in his gaze. "I'm glad the stagecoach was delayed," he said simply. Tabitha felt a smile spread across her face, unbidden and genuine. "So am I." The moment was brief but significant, an acknowledgement of the shifting nature of their relationship, of possibilities neither had dared voice aloud yet. As the days passed, such moments became more frequent. Travis began finding reasons to include Tabitha in ranch activities, teaching her to ride one of the gentler horses, showing her how the irrigation system worked, even letting her help with bottle feeding a newborn calf whose mother had rejected it. Emma was always included, bundled warmly and watching wide-eyed as her mother discovered a world so different from the city life she had known. One particularly mild afternoon, about a week after the stagecoach delay, Travis suggested a picnic by the creek that gave the ranch its name. Agnes packed a basket, and Travis hitched the wagon, laying blankets in the back to create a comfortable nest for Tabitha and Emma. The creek was partially frozen, ice formations creating delicate sculptures along its banks, but the sun was warm enough to make sitting outdoors pleasant. Travis spread a thick blanket on a sheltered patch of ground, and they sat side by side, Emma between them as they shared the simple meal Agnes had prepared. "It's beautiful here," Tabitha said, gazing at the crystal-clear water flowing between the ice. "Peaceful." Travis nodded, watching Emma as she batted at a blade of dried grass he'd given her to play with. "It's my favorite spot on the property. When I first saw this land, I stood right about here and knew this was where I wanted to build my home." "You chose well," Tabitha told him, studying his profile. In the week they'd been at the ranch, she had come to appreciate not just his kindness but his intelligence, his quiet humor, his unwavering integrity. And yes, his physical presence as well, the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. As if sensing her thoughts, Travis turned to meet her gaze. "Tabitha," he said, her name almost a caress on his lips. "These past days with you and Emma here, they've changed things for me." Tabitha's heart quickened. "Changed how?" He considered his words carefully. "For years I've been content with the life I built here. It was a good life, productive, peaceful. I told myself it was enough." He reached out to gently touch Emma's cheek as she gazed up at him with wide, curious eyes. "But having you both here has shown me what I've been missing. The sound of laughter in the house, conversation over meals, the feeling of belonging to something larger than myself." Tabitha swallowed hard, emotion rising in her throat. "Travis, I know you have plans, he continued, meeting her eyes again. A future mapped out for you and Emma in Oregon, and I would never presume to interfere with what you believe is best for your daughter, but I find myself hoping. Wondering if perhaps. He trailed off, and Tabitha found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to continue. If perhaps, he finally said, his voice low and earnest, you might consider a different path, one that includes Evergreen Ranch and me. The words hung in the air between them, momentous in their simplicity. Tabitha looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep between them, her tiny face peaceful in repose. I've been thinking about Oregon, she admitted softly. About why I decided to go there in the first place. It was the safest choice, the most practical one. James's brother is family, at least by marriage. He offered security when I had none. She looked up, meeting Travis's steady gaze. But I've realized something in these past days. Safety isn't just about practical considerations. It's also about feeling at home, valued, seen. Hope flickered in Travis's eyes. And do you feel those things here with me? Yes, Tabitha whispered. More than I ever expected to feel again after James died. Travis reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek gently. I never thought I would want this again, a family, a shared life. After Sarah, I closed that door and believed it was locked forever. His thumb traced her cheekbone with exquisite tenderness. But you found the key, Tabitha Morgan. You and Emma both. Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes, but they were tears of something close to joy, a sensation so unexpected and precious that it almost hurt. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, but of hoping again. Of believing in a future that could be taken away as suddenly as the last one was. I know, Travis said, understanding in his eyes. I'm afraid too, but I've come to think that perhaps a life without risk isn't really living at all, just existing. Tabitha nodded, leaning slightly into his touch. That's what James would say. He always believed in seizing happiness where you found it, because tomorrow was never guaranteed. A wise man, Travis murmured. I wish I could have known him. He would have liked you, Tabitha said with certainty. He valued honesty and hard work above all else. Like you do. They sat in silence for a moment, both aware of the precipice they stood upon. Then Travis spoke again, his voice steady but vulnerable. I'm not asking for an answer today, Tabitha. I know this is sudden and you need time to consider what's best for you and Emma. All I ask is that you think about staying, about giving us all three of us a chance at something I believe could be wonderful. Tabitha covered his hand where it still rested against her cheek. I will think about it. I promise. The journey back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. But that evening, as they sat before the fire after Emma had been put to bed, Tabitha found herself watching Travis as he read from one of his books, his strong profile illuminated by the firelight, and knew that her heart had already made its decision. The realization should have frightened her, this swift, unexpected change in the course of her life. Yet instead, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. As if her path had been leading her here all along, through grief and hardship, to this quiet moment by the fire with a man who had opened his home and his heart to her when she needed it most. Travis, she said softly, and he looked up from his book, his eyes questioning. I don't need more time to think. He set the book aside, turning to face her fully. No, Tabitha shook her head, her heart racing but her mind clear. No, I've spent too much of the past year afraid to trust my own judgment, afraid to hope for anything beyond mere survival. But being here with you, she took a deep breath. It feels right for me and for Emma. Travis's expression was cautious, as if he feared misunderstanding her. Are you saying? I'm saying yes, Tabitha said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. Yes to staying. Yes to building something new here with you. Yes to taking the risk of loving again, even knowing how painful loss can be. The transformation of Travis's face was beautiful to behold, hope blooming into joy, caution giving way to certainty. He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Are you sure, Tabitha? Truly sure? I don't want you to feel pressured," or she silenced him by leaning forward to press her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, chaste, but it conveyed more than words could have. When she pulled back, Travis's eyes were wide with wonder. "I'm sure," she said simply. Travis reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "I never expected to find you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That night in the saloon when you walked in with Emma. It was as if a light suddenly appeared in a dark room I'd grown used to navigating blindly." Tabitha smiled, her own eyes misting with tears. "And I never expected to find shelter that would become a home." This time it was Travis who initiated the kiss, his lips meeting hers with gentle passion. Tabitha felt herself responding, her arms sliding around his neck as something long dormant within her awakened. The kiss deepened, a tender exploration that spoke of promises and possibilities, of a future neither had dared imagine until now. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Travis rested his forehead against hers. "I should write to your brother-in-law in Oregon," he said. "Explain the change in plans." Tabitha nodded. "I'll write to him tomorrow. He'll understand, I think. James always said Harold valued happiness above convenience." Travis smiled, pressing another gentle kiss to her forehead. "Then we have his blessing from beyond, it seems." They remained close, talking softly of practical matters, how they would arrange the house to make room for Tabitha and Emma permanently, when they might visit the town to make their arrangement official, how Agnes and Hank would react to the news, though both suspected the two already had their suspicions. When Tabitha finally retired to her room that night, it was with the knowledge that soon it would no longer be her room but theirs, a shared space that symbolized a shared life. The thought brought not fear but anticipation, a quiet joy that she carried with her into sleep. The following morning, Tabitha woke to find a small wooden carving beside her bed, a perfect miniature horse that looked remarkably like Daisy, the mare Emma had been so fascinated by. A note in Travis's strong, clear handwriting accompanied it. "For Emma, to remember her first horse. And for you, as a promise of many more firsts to come." T, holding the carving, feeling the smooth grain of the wood beneath her fingers, Tabitha felt the last lingering doubts dissolve. This was right. This was where she and Emma belonged. As if on cue, her daughter stirred in the makeshift crib beside the bed, her morning babbles a happy soundtrack to the beginning of a new day and a new life. Tabitha leaned over to lift Emma into her arms, pressing a kiss to her downy head. "Good morning, my love," she whispered. "I have a feeling today is going to be the start of something wonderful." News of Travis and Tabitha's decision spread quickly through the small household. Agnes, upon being told over breakfast, had clasped her hands in delight and declared that she'd known it from the first day, while Hank had simply nodded with satisfaction, as if a particularly troublesome puzzle had finally been solved to his liking. "We'll need to make some adjustments to the house," Travis said as they all sat around the table. "The master bedroom is large enough for us, but Emma will need her own room as she grows. The study could be converted easily enough," Agnes suggested. "It gets good morning light, which would be nice for a child's room." Tabitha felt a warmth spread through her at how readily they all included Emma in their plans, not as an afterthought or obligation, but as an integral part of the family they were forming. "And we should ride into town today," Travis continued, his hand finding Tabitha's under the table. "To send your letter to Oregon and to speak with Reverend Miller about making our arrangement official." A flutter of nerves mingled with excitement in Tabitha's stomach. So soon? Travis's eyes softened as they met hers. "Unless you'd prefer to wait." "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "Today is perfect." After breakfast, while Agnes watched Emma, Tabitha composed her letter to Harold. She explained the circumstances of her delayed journey, the kindness she had found at Evergreen Ranch, and finally, her decision to build a life there with Travis. She expressed her gratitude for his offer of a home in Oregon and her hope that perhaps someday they might visit, so that Emma could know her father's family. As she sealed the envelope, Tabitha felt a sense of completion, one chapter of her life closing as another began. There was sadness there, an acknowledgement of the dreams she and James had shared that would never come to pass. But there was also hope, bright and promising, for the future she now faced with Travis. The ride into Willow Creek was crisp and beautiful, the winter landscape sparkling under a clear blue sky. Travis had hitched the wagon and filled hot bricks wrapped in flannel to keep them warm during the journey. Emma, bundled in layers of blankets, sat contentedly between them, her eyes wide as she took in the passing scenery. "She loves being outdoors," Tabitha observed, smiling at her daughter's obvious delight. "James would be pleased. He always said children should grow up with plenty of fresh air and open spaces." Travis nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I want you to know, Tabitha, that I'll never try to replace James in Emma's life. She should know about her father, who he was, how much he loved her." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than I can express." They reached town by mid-morning, the streets busier than they had been on the night Tabitha had first arrived. Several people nodded greeting to Travis as they passed, curious glances directed at Tabitha and Emma beside him. Their first stop was the post office, where Tabitha mailed her letter to Oregon. Then Travis guided the wagon to a small, well-kept church at the edge of town. "Reverend Miller is a good man," Travis told her as he helped her down from the wagon, Emma secure in her arms. "He's been in Willow Creek since before I arrived." The Reverend, a tall man with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, welcomed them warmly into his study. If he was surprised by their request to be married as soon as possible, he didn't show it. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, smiling at Emma, who was studying him with solemn curiosity, "bringing people together when they least expect it." They arranged for the ceremony to take place in 3 days' time, enough time for the necessary preparations, but not so long that it would coincide with the repaired stagecoach's arrival. Tabitha found herself touched by Travis's sensitivity to that detail, ensuring that their wedding day would be entirely separate from what would have been her departure date. As they left the church, Travis suggested they stop at the general store to purchase a few items for Emma and perhaps something special for the wedding. Tabitha agreed, though she felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of facing the townspeople who had witnessed her desperate arrival at the saloon that fateful night. The store was warm and well-stocked. The proprietor, a friendly woman named Mrs. Baker, who greeted Travis with obvious affection. "Mr. Blackwood, what a pleasant surprise. We don't often see you in town twice in 1 month." Her eyes moved to Tabitha and Emma with undisguised curiosity. "And who might these lovely ladies be, Mrs. Baker? I'd like you to meet Mrs. Tabitha Morgan and her daughter Emma," Travis said, his voice carrying a note of pride that made Tabitha's heart swell. "Soon to be Tabitha Blackwood. We've just come from arranging the ceremony with Reverend Miller." Mrs. Baker's face lit up with genuine delight. Well now, isn't that the most wonderful news? Congratulations to you both. She came around the counter to get a better look at Emma, and what a beautiful child, those eyes, just like a summer sky. Tabitha felt herself relaxing under the woman's warm reception. Thank you, Mrs. Baker. It's a pleasure to meet you. The pleasure is all mine, my dear. We've all been wondering what would finally convince our Travis to give up his bachelor ways. Now I see it took nothing less than an angel and her cherub. She winked at Travis, who actually blushed slightly. They spent a pleasant half-hour selecting items for Emma new blankets, tiny gowns that she would soon grow into, a soft stuffed bear that she immediately clutched to her chest with surprising strength. For the wedding, Mrs. Baker helped Tabitha choose a length of cream-colored lace to trim, a dress that Agnes had offered to help her make from some fine fabric stored in a trunk at the ranch. As they were preparing to leave, the store's door opened, admitting a heavy-set man with a florid complexion whom Tabitha recognized immediately as Harlan, the innkeeper who had turned her away. His step faltered when he saw her, recognition, and then discomfort crossing his features. "Blackwood," he acknowledged Travis with a curt nod, then glanced at Tabitha. "Mrs. Morgan." Travis's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained civil. "Harlan, I trust business is good at the inn." "Can't complain," the innkeeper replied, his eyes darting between them with obvious curiosity. "Heard the stage won't be running for another week at least." "That's right," Travis confirmed. "Though it matters less to us now, Mrs. Morgan and Emma will be staying in Willow Creek permanently. We're to be married on Saturday." Harlan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Married? Well, that's congratulations." The words seemed forced, but Travis merely nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you. If you'll excuse us, we should be getting back to the ranch." As they stepped outside, Tabitha noticed the tension in Travis's jaw. "You don't care for him much, do you?" she asked quietly as he helped her into the wagon. "I don't care for anyone who would turn away a woman and child in need," Travis replied, his voice low. "Especially in winter." Tabitha touched his arm gently. "If he hadn't, I might never have found you." The observation seemed to startle Travis, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "I hadn't thought of it that way." He settled Emma between them, making sure she was secure. "I suppose I owe Harlan a debt of gratitude after all." The ride back to the ranch was filled with conversation about their plans for the wedding, for the adjustments to the house, for the spring planting that would follow the winter months. Travis spoke of his hope to expand the herd, perhaps purchase additional land to the east where the grazing was particularly good. Tabitha shared her ideas for a small kitchen garden, something Agnes had mentioned wanting for years, but never having the time to maintain properly. As the ranch came into view, Tabitha was struck by how different it looked to her now compared to her first glimpse just over a week ago. Then, it had been a stranger's home, a temporary sanctuary. Now, it was the foundation of her future, the place where she and Emma would put down roots and grow. "Penny for your thoughts?" Travis asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Tabitha smiled, shifting Emma, who had fallen asleep, against her chest. "I was just thinking how quickly life can change, how doors we never knew existed can suddenly open before us." Travis's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Are you happy, Tabitha?" Truly, she met his gaze directly, wanting him to see the certainty in her eyes. "Yes, I am." The simple truth of those words settled between them like a promise as they made their way home together. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Agnes and Tabitha worked on her wedding dress, transforming a creamy silk that had once belonged to Travis's mother into a simple but elegant gown trimmed with the lace they had purchased in town. Hank and Travis rearranged furniture, clearing the study to make room for Emma's nursery, and moving Travis's books and desk to a corner of the main room. Word of the impending wedding spread through the small community, and soon visitors began arriving at the ranch, neighboring families bringing gifts and good wishes, curious to meet the woman who had captured Travis Blackwood's heart after so many years of solitude. Tabitha was touched by the warm welcome she received. These people knew little about her beyond what Travis had told them, yet they embraced her and Emma with genuine goodwill, seeming truly happy that Travis had found companionship after his years alone. On the evening before the wedding, after their visitors had departed, and Emma was asleep, Travis found Tabitha sitting on the porch despite the cold, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "You'll freeze out here," he said, draping a warm blanket around her shoulders before taking a seat beside her. "I wanted a moment of quiet," she explained, "to think about everything." Travis nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Second thoughts?" "No," she assured him quickly. "Not at all, just reflections, I suppose, on the journey that brought me here." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant howl of a coyote and the soft creaking of the porch swing beneath them. "I've been thinking," Travis said eventually, "about names." Tabitha looked at him questioningly. "For Emma," he clarified. "When the time comes for her to take my name," I thought. "Perhaps we might keep Morgan as her middle name, so she carries a piece of her father with her always." Emotion welled in Tabitha's throat at this thoughtful gesture. "Emma Morgan Blackwood," she said softly, testing the sound of it. "It's perfect. Thank you, Travis." He shrugged slightly, as if embarrassed by her gratitude. It seemed right. Tabitha leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Sometimes I wonder what James would think of all this, of you, of us." Travis was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'd like to believe he would approve, that he would want you and Emma to be happy, to be cared for." "He would," Tabitha said with certainty. "He was never one to cling to the past at the expense of the present. He lived fully in each moment." She smiled wistfully. "It was one of the things I loved most about him." Travis's arm slipped around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "Then we'll honor his memory by doing the same, by creating a good life for Emma and for ourselves." Tabitha nodded against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that this new chapter didn't erase the ones that had come before but built upon them, creating a story richer and more complex than she could have imagined when she'd first stepped into that saloon with nowhere to go and a baby on her hip. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Agnes arrived early, bustling about the kitchen preparing a special breakfast, and shooing Travis out to the barn with Hank, insisting it was bad luck for him to see Tabitha before the ceremony. "Superstitious nonsense," Travis grumbled good-naturedly as he donned his coat. "Tradition," Agnes corrected him firmly. "Now go make yourself useful elsewhere until it's time to leave for the church." Left alone with Agnes, Tabitha found herself both excited and nervous as the older woman helped her prepare. The dress, when she finally put it on, was more beautiful than she had dared hope, simple in design but elegant in its draping, the lace at the collar and cuffs adding a touch of delicacy. "You look radiant," Agnes declared, her eyes suspiciously bright as she secured the last pin in Tabitha's hair. "Absolutely beautiful." Emma, dressed in a new white gown that Agnes had secretly sewn, seemed to agree, reaching up from her blanket with delighted coos when she saw her mother. "And you, my darling," Tabitha said, lifting her daughter into her arms, "are the most beautiful girl in the territory." A knock at the door announced Hank's arrival to escort them to the wagon. When Tabitha emerged from the bedroom, his weathered face broke into a rare, wide smile. "Well now," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Ain't you both a sight to gladden an old man's heart? The ride to town was filled with a nervous excitement that Tabitha hadn't experienced the first time she'd married. With James, there had been the security of a long courtship, of knowing exactly what to expect from their life together. With Travis, there was still so much to discover, so many unknowns, yet she found that the uncertainty only added to the anticipation rather than diminishing it. The church was simple but lovely, decorated with evergreen boughs and what few winter flowers Mrs. Baker and the other town ladies had managed to coax from their indoor plants. To Tabitha's surprise, nearly the entire population of Willow Creek seemed to have turned out for the occasion, filling the small building to capacity. As Hank escorted her down the aisle, Emma in Agnes's arms just behind them, Tabitha's eyes found Travis waiting at the altar. He was dressed in what was clearly his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. But it was the expression on his face as he watched her approach that took her breath away, a mixture of awe, tenderness, and joy that spoke volumes about his feelings for her. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, Reverend Miller speaking eloquently about new beginnings, and the courage it took to open one's heart after loss. When the time came to exchange vows, Travis's voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Tabitha's as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her and Emma for all his days. Tabitha's own voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made the same promises in return, feeling the weight and beauty of the commitment they were making to each other. When Travis slipped the ring, a simple gold band that had once belonged to his grandmother, onto her finger, it felt right, as if it had always been meant to rest there. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Miller proclaimed with evident satisfaction, "I now pronounce you husband and wife, Mr. Blackwood. You may kiss your bride." Travis's hand was gentle as it cupped her cheek, his eyes searching hers one last time as if to assure himself that this was truly happening. Then his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and promising, sealing their union before the assembled witnesses. A cheer went up from the congregation as they turned to face them, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Travis Blackwood. Agnes stepped forward with Emma, who reached immediately for Tabitha. As she took her daughter in her arms, Travis's arm encircling them both, Tabitha felt a sense of completeness that had eluded her since James's death, the feeling of being part of a family again. The celebration that followed at the town's small hotel, Harlan having somewhat begrudgingly offered the space free of charge as a wedding gift, was joyous and lively. The townspeople welcomed Tabitha warmly, many sharing stories of how Travis had helped them over the years, tales he had never mentioned himself, of quiet generosity and steadfast support in times of need. "Your husband, Mrs. Baker confided as they watched Travis across the room, where he was proudly showing Emma to a group of admiring neighbors, is one of the finest men in these parts, and I haven't seen him look this happy since, well, ever." Tabitha's heart swelled with love as she observed the gentle way Travis handled her daughter, the obvious pride in his expression as he introduced her as "our Emma." "I'm a fortunate woman," she replied simply. As the afternoon waned, they bid farewell to their guests and began the journey back to the ranch back home. Emma, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep almost immediately in the wagon, and Tabitha found herself suddenly shy as she realized that this was the beginning of their life together as husband and wife in every sense. Travis seemed to sense her nervousness, his hand finding hers beneath the blanket they shared. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Tabitha looked at him, at this man who had opened his home and heart to her and Emma when they had nowhere else to go, who had shown her that life could offer second chances and new beginnings when she least expected them. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "More than I ever thought possible again." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long night, warm, illuminating, full of promise for the day ahead. And as they approached Evergreen Ranch, the place that would now truly be their home, Tabitha found herself filled with gratitude for the twist of fate that had led her to that saloon door on a cold winter night, and for the cowboy who had cleared a space at his table and in his life for a woman with nowhere to go and a baby on her hip. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on Evergreen Ranch, now nearly twice the size it had been when Tabitha first arrived. The sound of children's laughter echoed across the yard as Emma, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's adventurous spirit and her mother's determination, chased her 3-year-old brother Thomas around the oak tree that provided shade for their play. Tabitha watched them from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their third child, a girl, according to Agnes's confident prediction, was due to arrive before the first autumn frost. The years had been kind, bringing prosperity to the ranch and a deepening bond between her and Travis that had surpassed even her most hopeful expectations. Emma had thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, growing into a confident, curious child who loved animals and could already ride her pony with impressive skill. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes, and though she had no conscious memories of James, the stories Tabitha and Travis shared ensured she knew of the man who had given her life. Thomas was the image of Travis, serious and thoughtful even at his young age, with the same steady gaze that could assess a situation in moments. His arrival had been a joy that cemented their family, and watching Travis with his son had healed something in both of them that they hadn't realized was still wounded. "Mama, look what I found," Emma called, running toward the porch with something clutched carefully in her hands. Thomas followed more slowly, his expression cautious but curious. Tabitha smiled as her daughter presented her prize, a tiny frog, its green skin glistening in the sunlight. "That's a wonderful find, Emma, but remember what Papa taught you about creatures. They need to stay in their homes," Emma recited dutifully. "I'll put him back by the creek where I found him." "That's my girl," Tabitha praised, smoothing a hand over her daughter's wind-blown hair. The sound of hoofbeats announced Travis's return from the north pasture, where he and Hank had been checking on the new calves. Emma and Thomas immediately abandoned the frog in favor of racing to greet their father, their excited voices carrying across the yard. Tabitha watched as Travis dismounted, setting his hat aside to scoop both children into his arms with practiced ease. The sight still made her heart swell. This man who had once believed his capacity for family life was buried with his first wife, now so naturally embodying the role of father and husband. As they approached the house, Travis set the children down, instructing them to help Hank with his horse. His eyes found Tabitha on the porch, warming with the same love and desire that had only deepened over their years together. "How are my girls today?" he asked, climbing the steps to place a kiss on her lips before kneeling to press another against her rounded belly. "Active," Tabitha replied with a laugh as the baby kicked in response to her father's voice. "She's going to be as restless as her sister, I think." Travis rose, his hand lingering on her stomach. Poor child, caught between her mother's stubbornness and her father's restlessness. "She doesn't stand a chance at being anything but remarkable." Tabitha leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "Agnes says the Hendersons have invited us for supper next Sunday. Apparently their nephew is visiting from back east, and they're eager to show off their successful neighbors." Travis chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her cheek. More likely they're hoping to impress him with the eligible young ladies in the area. Poor man won't know what hit him. Perhaps he'll be like you, Tabitha suggested teasingly, determined to remain a bachelor until the right woman literally appears on his doorstep with nowhere else to go. There was only one right woman, Travis said, his tone shifting from playful to sincere. And somehow she found me when I wasn't even looking. Tabitha tilted her face up to his, still moved by the depth of feeling in his eyes when he looked at her. We found each other, she corrected gently. Both of us searching for something we didn't know we needed, until it was right in front of us. Their lips met in a kiss that held the comfortable familiarity of years together, but still sparked with the passion that had only grown as they'd built their life and family. The moment was interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the barn. "Papa, Thomas is trying to climb the ladder again," Travis sighed, pressing his forehead briefly against Tabitha's. "Duty calls." "Go," she laughed, giving him a gentle push. "Save our son from himself." Again. As Travis strode toward the barn, Tabitha settled back in her rocking chair, her hands cradling her unborn daughter. The ranch spread out before her, a testament to what could be built from determination, and love the fields that would feed them, the animals that would sustain them, the home that would shelter them. 5 years ago, she had entered a saloon with nothing but a baby on her hip and desperate hope in her heart. She had found not just shelter for the night, but a future she could never have imagined a man who loved her and Emma as his own, a home where they both belonged, and the chance to build a family that honored the past while embracing all the promise of tomorrow. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western hills, casting golden light across Evergreen Ranch, Tabitha closed her eyes in gratitude for the unexpected journey that had led her home.